That was just beautiful. It's a joy, a pleasure to be with you. I love this church. Known many friends here and for quite some years, and it's just a treat to be able to come and be with you again this Sunday. I remember well those weeks and months that followed my father's death. The tears were very brief and held back, even though I wasn't really consciously trying to hold them back. Our senior pastor would check in on me occasionally and see how I was doing. Perhaps he suspected that I had not fully grieved and wept. And since I'm a person who feels things deeply and passionately and who weeps at books and movies, it surprised me too. I told my pastor that I wasn't consciously trying to hold back, but for some reason the tears were not there. I was focused on my mom. How was she going to get on without the love of her life with whom she had spent the last 60 years? He died just 4 days after their 60th anniversary. And she was just past cancer treatments, frail and pale and very childlike. And although she did much better than any of us could have imagined, focusing on all the details of things that needed to be done, she still was ready to go. Life here on this earth no longer held the meaning and the joy that it had, and just 80 days after his death, we buried her too. But I was so fully practiced at keeping the grief at bay that I still shed very few tears. Where were they? Had I become so practiced at holding myself together when I sat by the bedside of people as that I visited in the hospital who were going through tragic circumstances, like young Gracie, just 25 years old, who had been plagued with an autoimmune disease since she was in her early teens, who was almost in constant pain, and whose life was briefly on this earth was so too quickly gone. Had I closed off that part of myself so I could maintain my composure? But about a month after my mother's death, I was sitting at the table one morning. I was writing a check. It happened to be my father's birthday, and I had been discussing that with friends and family, that Grandpa's birthday was coming up soon, and we laughed about some of the stories that he loved to tell, and he was quite the storyteller. And I didn't feel a particular sadness at that at all. But as I sat there writing that check that morning, I wrote the date in, and suddenly I felt the tears begin to just well up inside of me. And I just began to sob. I was overcome with the grief that I had been suppressing all these weeks and months. And then the phone rang. Well, thankfully, it was my husband, because I couldn't pull myself together to answer the phone calmly. I'm blubbering, hello, and he said, honey, what's wrong? And I said, I'm okay. I was just writing a check, and when I put the date in, the tears just started flowing, and I can't seem to stop them. And he said, you're finally finding your tears. Frederick Buechner, a favorite writer and pastor of many years, is one of my joys to read some of his writings every day. And in one of those, he says that it would help us all if we keep track of the time and events in our lives that bring tears to our eyes. They may be happy or sad moments. It may be at unexpected times and places. But whenever we're stirred to such depths, these are the times when God is at work in our lives. These are the emotional hot spots that something breaks through the veneer of our hardness in which we tend to entomb ourselves. They're like windows through which the light of God's love can get inside us. And when we're quick to slam shut those doors, those windows, we may be cutting ourselves off from God. Buechner also suggests that those who cannot weep also do not laugh much It's as if those emotions are tied together in the human psyche, and when you turn one off, you may be turning the other one off too. Jesus began to weep, our text tells us. And the story's a rather familiar one. Jesus had these 3 precious friends that he spent much time with in their home, Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. He often stayed there and enjoyed their hospitality and the time with them. And this whole thing happened very shortly before his life on this earth was briefly cut off. And Mary and Martha frantically sent word to him that Lazarus was very sick. And Jesus' reaction to that seems a little bit puzzling to us. He merely said his illness does not lead to death, rather it's for God's glory. Jesus knew that Lazarus' time was not up yet, but they didn't know that. And even stranger, as the story unfolds, he didn't rush back to his beloved friends. In fact, he took his time, and it was about 4 days later before he showed up. Now, normally, when people die in those days and times, they were buried the same day. They didn't have the embalming techniques that we have today, and so they did it quickly. But there was an old tradition that said that the spirit hovered above that body for about 3 days, maybe hoping someone would come back to life, or they weren't completely gone yet. But after that, there was no hope for resurrection. No wonder Mary and Martha were so disappointed that Jesus took his time to get there. In fact, they both greeted him, did you notice, with almost exactly the same words. If you had been here, he wouldn't have died. Was it an accusation? Or a profession of the depth of their faith? Or maybe a little of both? And when Jesus saw the women weeping and all the other friends who gathered weeping too, verse 33 says that he was greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved. Another way of saying it is that he was a little frustrated. Was he frustrated with Mary and Martha, whom he loved deeply? Was he frustrated with the fact that his own earthly time was nearing an end, and still, even his closest disciples were just not understanding the things that he was trying to teach them? Or maybe there was something even deeper going on. Come and see. Mary used those familiar words, come and see, words that Jesus had used often as he was calling the disciples to him. Come and see what kind of life I can bring to you if you'll follow me. What they were going to see and experience was going to change their lives completely and forever. And now he's hearing those same words spoken to him. Come and see, as she leads him to the tomb where Lazarus lives. And once he's there, immediately, Jesus begins to weep. Not just cry, but weep, sobbing grief. Over the centuries, scholars and theologians have tried to figure out exactly what the cause of his grief. Was it his empathy for his beloved friends and their grief? Or was he weeping in the frustration that so many he taught were still clueless? Or was he weeping because with those words, come and see, he is reminded of the realization that his own life on this earth would soon be coming to an end? Or could it be that all of those thoughts and emotions prompted him to express his grief in the most human reaction, tears? I'm so glad that the Bible tells us that Jesus wept. It's important when we remember that he was thoroughly human as well as thoroughly God. And I've often said that I wish there was just one little verse somewhere that said Jesus just threw back his head and just laughed out loud, because I'm sure he did. And so often we kind of have this picture of this rather passive, quiet person who just dealt with life very calmly, and we don't see many of those descriptions of him showing those deep, deep emotions that I'm sure that he had. The work of Jesus was to bring life. The work of our congregation is to unbind people from the trappings of death. Lazarus was all wrapped up, bound up in death's bindings, and Jesus shouted for him to come out, be free from all that binds you and holds you prisoner. To Martha, Jesus declared himself to be the resurrection and the life. And those words, resurrection and life, literally mean, I will stand you up. I will give you moral strength. And Jesus calls us to come and see and be freed to live up and bring the good news and life with a capital L to the rest of the world. We're no longer bound by faithless used-to-bes, but we're now free, and we're called to be agents of change in a broken and hurting world that often makes us weep. Now, my husband Keith and I are movie buffs. We love movies, and we like to watch all kinds of movies. We've lately become particularly attached to some British, the BBC mystery series. You know, those that you have to pay very close attention, and they introduce all these people, and you're trying to figure out how in the world, who done it, and how it's going to come out. We like those. But when I was growing up, and yes, we did have movies back then too, it was usually fairly easy to tell who were the good guys and who were the bad guys, right? The good guys wore a white hat, the bad guys wore the black hats. And for almost the start of the movie, you know who you were rooting for. And since you knew that, it made nearly anything they did to catch the bad guy okay, even if they didn't follow the rules or the laws. But have you noticed these days that it's not so easy to separate the good and the bad in the movies? More often, we're getting glimpses into all the characters and what makes them act the way they do. What's going on inside of them? What kinds of pain might be motivating some of that horrible behavior? Because you see, some of the pain behind those who often inflict pain on others is part of that reason. It doesn't make the inflicting of pain okay, but it does help us to remember that they are human and that we all inflict pain and discomfort on others, sometimes quite unintentionally, but we do that. And we see that sometimes the motivation behind the good guy's actions isn't always so pure. So there's flaws in both the good and the bad, just like us. Is that part of the reason that we find it hard, maybe, to find our tears these days? We're so bombarded with images and sounds of people in pain, people who are angry, people who are suffering, and it's often confusing to know who or what to blame. If we watch the news, we hear conflicting reports of what really happened. We hear name-calling and anger, and what do we do with that? How do we sort all of that out? How do we keep from either becoming so angry ourselves and allowing our blood pressure to go up, or become so passively removed to protect ourselves so we're not allowing any emotion? Tough times. Jesus wept as he observed the condition of our brokenness. Do we weep too as we pray for change? If you do, I challenge you to make those tears count for something. I challenge you to slow down and to live in the moment, to pay attention to yourself and to your surroundings. We're so busy heading to our next appointment or dwelling over something somebody said that made us mad or it made us feel small that we fail to see the obvious. Look around you. What do you see? In our community, and I would imagine in Columbia too, we have some folks that we see downtown every day, folks that we're pretty sure don't have a home and have all the possessions they own in a backpack on their back. And sometimes they have a dog with them. And I found that dogs are great conversation starters. You can stop and say, oh, what a pretty dog, what a sweet puppy. Is it okay if I pet them? And what's its name? And first thing you know, you've got a conversation going with someone who kind of comes alive because somebody doesn't see them. Somebody does see them, and they're not just invisible anymore. They're a real person. They're a person with some of the same wants and needs that we have. I wonder what circumstances have brought them to this place. Jesus challenged the status quo of the church people of his community to get outside of their comfort zones. It's one of the reasons he was hated to the point of plotting his murder. Spending time with prostitutes and tax collectors was just not acceptable, and that must have grieved his soul. Jesus looked deep into people's souls. He saw them as people with pain, with brokenness, and people who had value. About 8 years ago, my husband and I made a life-changing decision. It was one both our friends and our family thought might make us just a little bit crazy, or might mean we were. We sold a beautiful large home that we had built only 4 years earlier so that we could buy two 100-year-old houses in a transitional neighborhood and rehab the bottom floor of one of those to make a home for ourselves. It was a huge task, and it took much longer than we thought and probably more money than we imagined. But we have never regretted our move to Cherry Street. It was totally a God thing. It was the response to a longtime dream of living among those who struggle and being a good neighbor as evidence of our love of God and others. At first, our church family questioned our safety. After all, this was once, not that many years ago, the worst drug block in the city. Drug raids had occurred more than once in our stately brick house, in the floor that we call home now. Our sons told people that we had moved to the hood. It was a joke, but with an underlying serious tone that revealed their uncertainty about the wisdom of our move there. And boy, have we learned a lot these last 8 years. We've made a ton of mistakes, but somehow God has helped us through those, that we don't feel bitter or jaded about those. They were learning situations, and we've learned better how to help and how not to help. The 6 apartments that we rent out are inhabited by folks we've come to love and care for. They're folks who do struggle to make ends meet, and sometimes they struggle to keep jobs. Their efforts and the many challenges that come their way have caused me to shed quite a few tears these past 8 years. The attitude of so many about the poor generally has caused me to shed quite a few tears. It's pretty hard to pull yourself up by your bootstraps when your boots are totally worn down to the nub and the straps are totally gone. Now, many of these folks have dark skin, the color that makes them suspicious to some, and some also have to check that box that is required on most job applications that shows if you've ever been arrested for a felony. They've learned again and again that checking that box will make it difficult for them to even get an interview for a job for the rest of their lives, no matter how old they were when they were arrested and no matter what the offense was. And I weep. I see the sadness in their eyes, and I see the hope dwindling. I wonder how long these barriers that just keep cropping up and keep them down before they will become so angry that they do something foolish again. I see the generosity that they have for one another, sometimes sharing the last cigarette they have with another friend. I'm not that generous. If I smoked and I had one cigarette left, and someone wanted it, I probably wouldn't share it, because not knowing when I was going to get another one. One of our earliest neighbors was a transgender person. She regularly showed up on our doorstep to borrow some coffee. And when we had a house blessing on one beautiful Sunday afternoon, our neighborhood gathered, our friends from church, our choir was on the porch, our pastor led the blessing. She was among those in the group, and a couple of friends noticed her and said to me, well, there's your first project. And I tried to, as quietly and gently as possible, respond that we didn't move to Cherry Street to make projects out of our friends. We moved there to be a friend. the kind of friend you can borrow a cup of coffee from or some coffee when you need it. When you allow your life to be intertwined with folks who are different from you, life gets messy. It isn't always easy to have the wisdom to know how to respond to all the issues that come up. It isn't always comfortable, but isn't that what Jesus calls us to do? He modeled it every single day of his earthly life. If Buechner's suggestion that perhaps our tears and our laughter are intertwined, then this message would not be complete without a little encouragement and find joy in your life too. Finding joy is sometimes confused with finding happiness. Happiness is fleeting, and it's too often associated with possessing things, spending money and hoping it will bring us satisfaction. And sometimes it does, but usually it's pretty short-lived. It's the kind of satisfaction that doesn't come with those sweet memories and renewed joy that lingers, like the joy of spending time with dear friends and family. Taking a walk on a beautiful day, taking time to smell the flowers that grow along the way, finding the joy in a baby's laughter, our pets' antics, and the belly laughs we enjoy from watching an old funny movie together with someone that we love. These are joyful, rich experiences that we cherish long after they happen. So what would be the takeaways from this message today? There's 5 of them. First one, I would say, be present in the moment you're in now. Don't spend all your time looking back and regretting all the mistakes and the poor decisions that you've made. We have all done that. Pay attention to yourself and to your surroundings. What is there to see? What is there to learn? Who needs a smile and a kind word today? Who has been invisible that I really need to see? Number 2, find a regular time to get outside of your comfort zone, your safe neighborhood, and your friends. Do that more than once a year on a mission trip, but make it a regular part of your life. Read books that make you weep, like The New Jim Crow, books that face the reality of inequality and injustice and you can't deny. You may find yourself yearning to get involved in stopping predatory lending, mass incarceration, racial injustice, and homelessness. Number 3, find a regular time to pursue joy, not happiness with fueling our addictions, but things that don't cost money. Time with friends and family who lift you up and make you laugh. Enjoying the beautiful outdoors and all that God created for your pleasure. Number 4, and this is a big, tough one. I don't think I've ever succeeded in completing this. Carve out 24 hours without criticizing anyone or yourself. Just be thankful that our extravagantly generous God loves us, warts and all, and bask in that love and show that same love and grace to others. And last, give yourself permission to weep and to laugh. Give yourself permission to feel. Don't wallow in pain and don't escape in your joy, but own up to your feelings and give them to God. Henry Nouwen, another favorite writer, theologian, has said, there is within you a lamb and a lion. Spiritual maturity is the ability to let the lamb and the lion lie down together. Your lion is your adult, aggressive self. It's your initiative-taking, decision-making self. But you also have this fearful, vulnerable lamb, the part of you that needs affection, support, affirmation, and nurturing. If you only heed your lion, you're going to find yourself overextended and exhausted. When you take notice only of your lamb, you will easily become a victim of your need for other people's attention. The art of spiritual living is to fully claim both your lion and your lamb, and then you can act assertively without denying your own needs, and you can ask for affection and care without betraying your talent to offer leadership. Developing your identity as a child of God in no way means giving up your responsibilities. The more you can feel safe as a child of God, the freer you will be to claim your mission in the world as a responsible human being. And the more you claim that you have a unique task to fulfill for God, the more open you will be to letting your deepest needs be made known. As we come down to the close here, I was taken by a song a number of years ago that Keith Green, Christian songwriter, wrote. It's called "My Eyes Are Dry," hence our title of the sermon today. And his words express what many of us feel at times. They go like this: my eyes are dry, my faith is old, my heart is hard, and my prayers are cold. And I know how I ought to be, alive to you, God, and dead to me. Oh, what can be done for an old heart like mine? Soften it up with oil and wine. The oil is you, your spirit of love. Please wash me anew in the wine of your blood. Are your eyes dry? Is the pain and the agony you feel for the world's suffering so carefully contained that you seldom weep? Does it just hurt too much if you allow yourself to feel the pain and allow the tears to flow? Jesus wept, and you can weep too. In fact, you must weep too. And while you're weeping, get actively involved in changing the world. Put your money where your heart is. Let God loose the binding of selfishness, greed, and hopelessness, and give you God's spirit of caring and giving and weeping and loosening of others' bindings, so that God's will might be done on this earth as it is in heaven.